Welcome to PanLab Podcast. I'm Akansha, and I'm a psychologist and an independent researcher in the field of effective neuroscience. Kicking off our journey about human behavior, all the aspects of human behavior. How does it gets played out in the world? What builds the behavioral aspects of it? How do we develop? How do we change? How does everything affect from your nature to your nurture, from your genes to your environment, from your prenatal environment to your postnatal environment, from your childhood to your adolescent to your adulthood? We have been trying to understand all these aspects from a very fundamental perspective of biology and psychology of it. So, till now, we talked about the five major traits of personality, namely extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness. Now we're going to take up these traits individually. So for today, we're going to talk about extroversion and neuroticism. We have talked about the basic motivations. What are the basic motivations? That includes your hunger, thirst, sexual desires, body temperature, pain. That includes your physical pain and mental equivalence of it, like grief, disappointment, frustration, roughly speaking. And then the anticipation of the pain, which is fear, anxiety, something of that sort. Then we have got anger and aggression system. We have got panic and escape systems also. Now, panic and escape system are fundamentally associated with pain, but they can trigger at their own as well. So panic and escape seem somewhat like anxiety and fear, even though if we really look at the exact definition, panic is an extreme level of fear. And I think fear can trigger panic, but panic seems to be more primordial circuit, the old hardwired circuit in our brain. And if you're panicking, there's enough impetus to escape. So that's a different circuit, which is basically mediated by amygdala and prefrontal cortex. And in our coming lectures, we're going to talk more about amygdala and prefrontal cortex at more fundamental levels. Then we have got affiliation and care, which seems like agreeableness as a trait, exploration and play. So these are the basic motivation system, which we call them as primordial systems. These are old circuits in your brain, which are very, very hardwired. Rest other things develop over them or are pretty new as compared to these basic fundamental circuits. These are your basic primordial needs, or id, as Freud called them. So Freudian psychology talks about three concepts of id, ego, and superego. And id are your these basic primordial instincts, and there is no way to do away with them. These are your animal instincts, you can say, or even the animal have them. Animal feel the need of reproduction, hunger, thirst. They feel the pain. I think all of them do. And like most of the species and primates, we are very, very interested in play and exploration, which is the adventure part of it. We often feel that we have control over these basic impulses, but on the contrary, you can focus on doing other things only if these hardwired fundamental primordial instincts have already been taken care of. If you're not hungry, you're not thirsty, you're not too cold or too hot, you're not deprived of essential play and exploration, adventure part of your life, that's the time you can actually focus on doing the higher cognitive functions or the activities which developed later on in the evolution. But apart from that, it's difficult. Try to just focus on doing a cognitive work at the time when you're really hungry. All you will be doing is thinking about the food, wanting to eat food, or just rushing through the work so that you can go and eat the food. These primordial functions have been taken care by the hypothalamus area of the brain. And whenever it's about the hypothalamus and the newly developed regions of your brain, like frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, your hypothalamus almost always win, because the main aim of your hypothalamus is to keep you alive, to make you survive. So if you want to defend a system which is as old as hypothalamus and as vital as keeping you alive, the other newly developed systems don't have much of the chance. So we may go ahead and think that we are in full control of our wishes, desires, instincts, but there's a caveat. The control is only exercised when rest of your basic needs are being taken care of. Otherwise, you're just a slave to these basic needs, which actually is not a bad way to look at it. It's not a bad thing. These basic needs are essentially keeping you alive. Why would we want to get rid of them in any way? So we have talked about the basic motivation, these primordial needs, which are the basis of our motivations. And on the basis of that, we define the goals in our life. Your goals are the things that drives you, that motivates you. And motivations not only sets goal, it actually builds the whole framework within which these goals are being pursued. You see the world from the perspective of the things that matters to you. Rest everything is irrelevant. So now we're going to talk about some basic emotions. And to simplify it, we'll divide it into two basic emotions here, positive emotion and negative emotion, which basically gives you extroversion and neuroticism. So when we talk about positive emotion, we basically refer to two types of positive emotions. First class of positive emotion is when you run a motivational framework to its limits. For example, you're hungry, you go out, you eat the food, you're no longer hungry. Now, what exactly you feel when you satisfy your hunger by eating? It's not a celebratory, enthusiastic, positive emotion. Rather, it's something called satiation. So when motivational routine runs successfully, what happens is it eliminates its necessity to exist temporarily. So basically what is happening here is you run a framework to its logical conclusion and then it just disappears. It's done. You might be satisfied for that time being and you can focus on the next thing. Now this next thing happens to be your next or another motivational framework. That pops up and you're in the same game again. Every time one of your motivational framework appears, you have to run to its logical conclusion and then it disappears for the time being. And again, the next day, you are in the same loop again. So this type of positive emotion is something that you associate more with the satisfaction of needs or completion of the task or the motivational frameworks running to its logical conclusion. Satiation. It's not what you feel when you run a touchdown, when you win a race, or when you get awarded for your work, right? Yet, this type of positive emotion is enormously essential for the daily well-being. We might not really give too much importance to these daily routinal tasks that keeps our life in order, but they're highly associated with the sanity and the kind of satisfaction that we feel on a daily basis. And it's only when you're satisfied on a daily basis you can thrive to do more or push yourself to put more efforts to achieve greater things. So these things are equally important, and this comes into one type of a positive emotion. And these positive emotions are more or less are consummatory ones. You consume them, you satisfy the need of their existence, you're done with them. And they are unconditioned. Unconditioned means you don't need to learn them. We don't need to learn how we feel when we eat something while we are hungry, or how we feel when we drink water when you're thirsty. That feeling of satisfaction is what we call unconditioned, consummatory, positive emotion. The other kind of positive emotion is when you feel like you might get a reward, hope, curiosity, anticipation, excitement, enthusiasm. All these positive emotions that we feel like kind of happy, or this happy is the evidence that your pursuit of a valued consummatory reward is going well. It's an emotion that comes up when you can evaluate your progress is on the right track, which is like an incentive reward. And the reason why it's called incentive reward is because you're motivated to move forward towards these rewards. There is a price associated with it. So, this moving forward, the impulse to move towards a desired goal, that's what your positive emotion system, your dopaminergic system, nestled in the hypothalamus, that's what mediated. We have heard so much about dopamine and its role in reward, and that's all correct. But dopamine is majorly a molecule of motivation, goal directed behavior. The highest spike of dopamine is released when you're anticipating a consummatory reward. When you're looking forward, you're hoping that something is going to give you really, really good returns. The phase of anticipation releases the highest surge of dopamine. That's why your behavior becomes very goal oriented when it's mediated by the dopamine system. This is what positive emotion essentially is. There's something good and I'm going to get it. So, this part that I'm going to get it, that's associated with excitement, anticipation, and majorly positive emotion. It's what you experience like if you are an extrovert and you go to the party, you're probably more excited about going to the party than the act of being at the party itself. So we human beings are really weird creatures. It's often the apprehension of the consummatory reward, which is way more powerful emotion than the emotion itself that is felt by gaining the reward. And that's partly because we are so exploratory. We get excited about the new things. The kind of dopamine release that we experience when we are anticipating something new and something excitatory that's going to happen outweighs that new thing itself. That's why the whole notion of journey is way more enjoyable than the result itself or reaching to the destination itself, because yes, your systems are way more attuned and way more excited by the journey itself than the destination. That's why you see that the kind of feeling you get when you win a match is way more positive and way more celebratory, enthusiastic than few minutes later once you have already won. Then it starts coming down. The dopamine surge start decreasing and it comes to the baseline again. So it's just not the saying about the journey and the destination thing. It's actually how your physiology and your biology and your psychology works. There's actually a dopaminergic system that mediates the whole system associated with the anticipation of incentive rewards. And this is not secondary learning. It leads to the apprehension of them. And they have been around for so long that your brain has developed an entire separate circuitry for that. And that circuit is the one which produces positive emotion. And that circuit also gets activated when you are taking a drug that you really like. So that's because it's activating this dopaminergic incentive reward system. And that's the reason you get addicted to certain drugs, because you abuse a dopaminergic system, you are spiking it way too often, making it feel good in an unnatural way, and it gets used to it. And after a point, it doesn't really produces the same sort of effect as it produced when the first time you took the drug. So you have to increase the doses. And that's how the whole loop of addiction starts. It happens with anything that you feel good about. It's not just limited to drugs. So one of the behaviors that we adopt is every time you get rewarded, you're supposed to celebrate. But more optimized way of doing and more optimized way of mediating your dopaminergic system is, for once a while, every now and then, you should let go of certain rewards or certain celebration associated with some wins or rewards or happiness, that whatever the category you put it into. So like every time a scientist publishes a paper, oh, they should celebrate. But every once a while, every now and then, they should not celebrate when they publish a paper, so that they can keep their dopamine levels very, very optimized and don't run them to its unoptimized behavior. The thing that you have to take from this is there are two types of positive emotions. One positive emotion, when we run one of our motivational frame to its end or its conclusion. So your basic motivational frameworks of hunger, thirst, reproduction, play, affection, affiliation, pain. If you are in pain, you can really treat it through medication and other stuff and elevate that pain. And the mental equivalence of it, you can talk to the people or you can indulge yourself into the behavioral ways and the tools that can help you regulate your emotional pain. So these are the motivational frameworks. These are the consummatory rewards, which are unconditioned. We don't have to learn them. The feeling that we get after running them through their conclusion is the feeling of satisfaction, satiation. It's not exactly an enthusiastic celebratory feeling. On the other hand, the other type of positive emotion is when you are anticipating something, when you are in apprehension of a reward to come. So hope, curiosity, excitement, all these kind of emotions that makes you alert and like makes you really look forward to the coming time because you're hoping for something really good to happen. So this kind of incentive reward system is mediated by dopaminergic system. So the circuit of dopamine in your hypothalamus that regulates this, which again goes away as soon as we achieve that thing. So oftentimes we are more excited and happy and we feel the maximum release of the dopamine and the associated happiness to that release when we are anticipating something good to happen or when we are getting ready for something or when we are looking forward to something. It's like the initial phase of a relationship where everything is new, it's novel, it's exciting. There is a lot of hope associated with that, and that's what keeps you going. That's what makes you happy. And once you just get to the finish line, or once you settle down with a person, then again the dopamine start coming to its baseline, the excitement, curiosity, everything start declining and getting to be more stable baseline. And that stability is something that we don't associate with an incentive reward system. So you should approach good things. Approaching them release a lot of dopamine within you that makes you feel motivated, goal-oriented, happy to say, excited about life. It helps you to stay away from depression and anxiety. But if bad things happen, what should you do? Now, one thing that you should do when bad things happen is stop. Just stop. Another thing you should do is to get the hell out of there. So there's this constellation of negative emotion that are associated with defense. And we have kind of talked about these negative emotions, which are pain, grief, frustration, disappointment, and fear. And fear get conditioned. We learn to associate things related to fear. A lot of experiments done among rats where they learn to fear a particular stimulus or a signal, even though when there is no danger associated with that. So every time a rat presses a lever and he gets shocked, he learned to associate pressing lever with a negative emotion with a shock. So now after 10 trials, on the 11th trial, when pressing the lever is not getting the rat shock, still their amygdala, their anxiety fear center of the brain gets activated, even when there is no shock present anymore. This is what we call conditioned fearing. We learn to associate things that we fear from. And that's why, even when the real fear does not exist anymore, this is something also associated with PTSD, where they learn the trauma and the systems that can mediate in unlearning that trauma don't function as well as the systems that are keeping it alive, even when the trauma does not exist anymore. Example, children having fear of needles. And fear has its own circuit, again, where behaviorists went a little wrong because they thought of unconditioned punishment, which produces pain, as the primary motivation system. Behaviorists really propagated the idea of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, which we now know doesn't work at all. And it was a hell of a bad idea to impose upon children in order to make them learn things. Because there are other systems which are involved, your genetics, your environment, your plasticity, your functioning of different systems in your brain. Just by a positive reinforcement or a negative reinforcement does not make you learn or unlearn things. So behaviorists, they thought of unconditioned punishment, which produces pain, as the primary motivation system. So there's unconditioned punishment, unconditioned rewards. And then there are things that you learn about that produces unconditioned punishment and unconditioned rewards. But all of those have circuits, and they are pretty much independent circuits. So defense and avoidance, negative emotions. And then there's disgust. And people have been looking at disgust a lot lately. Now, the interesting thing about disgust is it is not load on neuroticism. It's somewhere associated with conscientiousness or orderliness aspect of it. And it has got its separate circuit too. So one other complexity that you need to deal with, which is that there's things that hurt, that cause you pain. Then there are things that satisfy you, that brings you reward. Then there are things which signal each of those. Okay, that is your anticipation of a fear or an anticipation of incentive reward signaling, right? But there's one class of stimuli or class of things that you're going to encounter that are paradoxical. It contains the opposites together. And that class of thing is something that you don't understand. And that's the idea of revelation of the meaning. Because revelation of the meaning is mostly associated with you encountering something that you haven't understood yet. So you explore that. New information comes out. Now, that new information could be good, could be bad, could be something that is confusing, could be good and bad both at the same time. We don't know. Most of you would have experienced that at some point in your life, something so novel and so shocking would have happened to you that it changes your life completely. It changes you completely. And you don't exactly know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing to happen. You go through a relationship, the start of it, all wonderful, all happy, all exciting. You associate so much of hope with it. You kind of envision your entire life, your entire dream life within that relation. And something happens. You get betrayed in that. And as soon as you get betrayed, it's like everything that was in your hand till now just flows right back from where it started. The things, the home, the person that you knew are completely new to you. You do not know where exactly you are, or how you're feeling, or how you're going to build from here. Where are you going to go? In which direction will you go from here? That kind of novelty is definitely not something that you can say it's a good thing to happen. But down the line, few years past down that, from that new thing comes new you, which is way more strong, way more mature, way more wise and evolved, way more empathetic. way more sensitive, and way more understanding than you ever were. The new definition of you is of somebody who is not naive anymore, but who has a lot of courage to show and trust the world again, trust the life again. And probably you meet someone new that compliments you in that way and makes you feel way better than you ever felt. So these kind of novelties, these paradoxical novelties where you don't understand during that time whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to happen, but they definitely leads to a better version of you. But this kind of novelty, or any novelty at initial point, really enrages you, confuses you, because you don't understand any of it. It's associated with a lot of complexity in the beginning, and slowly, steadily, the meaning get revealed. And that whole revelation of meaning is what creates something very, very foundational. So you could be moving from point A to point B, and what you predict or what you want is happening, then that's a good thing. You're on the right track. It keeps you in good mood. It fills you with hope and everything, essentially positive emotion. Or the other outcome, you can have an unpredicted outcome, like when you plan to go out with your friends, so you go to their home and knock on the door, and your friend is not there. So what happens? It's like a hole in your framework, because your entire framework was dependent on the presence of your friend. So this presupposition got completely debunked now. So every now and then, you'll run out of behavioral routine. And one of your presupposition is going to turn out to be wrong. That's like a hole in your theory. And you sort of drop into that hole. And when you drop into that hole, you get all anxious, because you don't know what this unexpected thing means. And you get all exploratory behind that. Your imagination runs wild. You create all kind of hypotheses around why your friend was not there, or why this hole appeared in your plan. So for some people, it's going to make them really scared at first. A lot of negative emotions are going to come up. Like, oh, my friend is not there because he doesn't like me anymore. No one likes me anymore. Therefore, I am a terrible person. That happens to the people, especially people who are really inclined towards depression. Of course, once they calm down, a little bit of exploration circuit that comes, and maybe they walk somewhere else. Maybe they go to the park, or maybe they'll stand there and think, well, this didn't work out, so what else could I do? Now, what I want to explain through this example is that an emotionally stable person, say a non-neurotic person, will flip that hole into something that didn't bother them much. And they're going to come out of that disappointment really fast, especially if they're extroverted and open. Whereas if someone who's having a negative emotion, or who is quite high on the end of neuroticism, the fact that their friend wasn't there when they told that they would be, might just produce the hole. They'll fall into so deep and painful that they'll just go home and cry. And that happens to people a lot. So the neuroticism and extroversion, in some sense, they carry to the degree to which the negative emotion system is strong, or the degree to which the positive emotion system is strong. And they are two different systems. They are not intertwined systems. They are very much independent circuitries for both your negative emotions and positive emotion. That means that you could be highly extroverted and high in neuroticism, both at the same time, or as a form of a personality. Because their circuitry is independent and they operate independently, so they can coexist. Although those are really highly complicated personalities. So you think of them in some sense like unit of positive emotion per unit of promise, or unit of negative emotion per unit of threat. how much positive emotion you're feeling with respect to the promises that have been made or what you're expecting, or how much negative emotion you feel for every threat that has been posed to you. And highly positive person would feel comparatively less negative emotion per unit of threat as opposed to a person who's high in neuroticism. It's a weird thing to quantify. So, like, if there's a rumor going on around that you're going to lose your job, then how much should you worry about that? Well, you don't know. You exactly don't know how much you should worry. And it's not even you who decide that. It's your wiring that decide. If you're high on negative emotion, you'll get all anxious and freak out, which might be the right thing to do. But if you are emotionally stable, you'll be like, I probably won't lose my job. And even if I do, I'm not going to worry about it. So actually, it's a perceptual problem. So if something goes wrong, then it might be you're looking at things wrong. Your perceptual systems are completely out of whack. It's unlikely, but sometimes that's the case. You saw it completely wrong. And that happens to people. But let's just forget about that for now and say that you're looking at the world fine. It's completely correct. And your inferences are about what went wrong. What went wrong isn't the consequence of you misperceiving, you looking at the world wrong. No, it's a consequence of some stupid problem with your stupid plan. Now, the problem is you do not know where exactly the error is located in your plan. When you formulated the plan, which was based on your motivations, you formulated in different layers, considering certain assumptions. Now, when you encounter a problem or a hole in your plan, you need to reevaluate all your assumptions, all the elements that you consider while formulating the plan, considering that you are looking at the world right. So that means that there is not any major flaw with how you're perceiving it. It's just some flaws with the way you formulated it. That's where the error is. But that's a complex problem in itself. That's why I think there's temperament. Sometimes when something unexpected happens, you should really freak out. That's the right thing to do sometimes. And other time, you should just ignore it. But you can't tell which of those are true right away. So what happened is there's a distribution. Let a thing happen, some people get really upset about it, and the other people hardly care about it. And sometimes the people who get upset about it are right, and sometimes the people who ignore it are right. So that's why there's variability in the distribution of the traits, and also to at what level, what intensity those traits are being distributed. So every individual has a different degree of distribution of the traits within them. They might be high in extroversion, high in agreeableness, low in openness, but how low they are, it could be somewhere nearing an average or below than average or above average or completely at the extreme end of it. So a lot of variability is involved in the temperament of the people and the distribution of the traits within them. And there is a variability in neuroticism. So now what you do when you are exploring is you start to decompose your plan. And if you can manage it without making yourself all anxious, because that happens when you're decomposing your plan, you're trying to figure out where the problem is. It makes people really, really anxious. It paralyzes them. So if you are able to manage to decompose your plan without getting gripped by anxiety, without letting that anxiety paralyzes you, then you can go into your plan and think like, am I a complete loser? Or is some micro thing that's gone wrong which can be fixed? And then you can start to decompose and reconstruct your plan again, reconfigure it. Remember all of that. so that you know what it is exactly composed of. And what opens up underneath this plan is when you made a mistake, is the complexity of the plan and also potentially the complexity of the world, because it's just not that you are dealing with the complexity of your plan and if you just figure out and decompose it, you can fix the problem. This plan is functioning in a dynamic world. So the complexity of the world is also associated with it. So potentially the complexity of the world on the off chance that you misperceived it, right? And in that scenario, if you have misperceived the world, if you were seeing the things wrong and then you formulated the plan, in that case, you have to scrape the entire plan completely and start from the scratch because it was formulated on the wrong basis from the very beginning. Now, part of the reason I believe people stick to their belief system so hard is because people don't like it when the whole appears in one of their big abstractions. They don't like it when a doubt creeps into their belief system. Because these things are the representation of their faith. It's sort of like axioms of faith, and if a problem appears in that, one of their axioms of faith, then all this complexity that they were keeping at bay, which was not in the forefront, comes rushing up. And it's overwhelming. It's really, really overwhelming and exhausting, emotionally exhaustive. So people hate it when you undermine one of their higher order abstractions or you raise a question on their belief systems. Because in order to answer you, in order to just look at it in a more sensible way, they have to do this massive search of figuring out where they exactly went wrong or where the problem is. And that requires a hell lot of effort and sanity to do. You have to be really, really strong to deal with it. That's why the first and impulsive reaction of people is of aggression or is of complete denial or is something that they completely burst into tears. It's a very emotional reaction. We're going to end it here. Thank you so much for listening, for taking out your valuable time and showing your interest in science, especially the science of neurobiology and psychology. Thank you. Take care.